always really appreciate it when you lead us in prayer, Rob. It's always very thoughtful and reflective, and I find it really, really helpful. So thank you, mate. And I've got to say that I much prefer the way you say Grant rather than Grant. The Grant, the Aussie accent type of it is pretty harsh, isn't it? It's the long weekend this weekend, and you're not going to get a kind of a traditional sermon this morning because a couple of months ago, Matt Moran and myself went away for a few weeks, and a number of people have asked us over that time, what did you do and why did you do it? And that's a really good question. So what we thought we would do is we would take the opportunity this morning to share with you, and I'm sure Matt's going to come up here sometime, aren't you, Matt? Thank you. And we thought we'd take the opportunity to share with you a little bit of a conversation about why on earth we did that. You know, I was reflecting the other week, Matt, that you and I have been working together now for nearly 9 years. And I realised that that's the longest time I've ever actually worked with someone in a work relationship. And so well done for putting up with me for that amount of time.
I was about to say the same thing.
Well, that's true. One of the things, obviously, in the space of 9 years, we've had an incredible amount of conversations about all sorts of things. But when it comes to kind of ministry life and area, one of the things that we've often spoken about is how is the church going, isn't it? That's kind of one of the things that we've had discussions numbers of times. I remember sitting down, even just recently in January this year, sitting down for what I thought was a 10-minute conversation. Now, I'll warn you, okay? If you ever sit down with Matt, there's no such thing as a 10-minute conversation. I thought it was going to be a 10-minute conversation, went for 2.5 hours, and it didn't take long to get sidetracked. Matt has the gift of tangents. Who else has the gift of tangential thinking? Is anybody else here who can relate to this? Yes, you're incredibly gifted, wonderful. And one of the questions that we contemplated and debated was what would CHBC look like in 10 years' time if we considered where we're at. And I suppose it fit into some of our discussions about where we felt the life of the church was at, didn't we? I suppose there were a couple of things from my perspective that were kind of significant, I think, that as we think about like what Western society looks like at the moment, that there's rising secularism in Maroondah and stuff. The demographics are kind of frightening. There's more and more people amongst younger generations who are not interested in church. They're interested in Jesus to a degree, but not so much in church. A church of our size, we are a reasonable size, but small churches in the area are really struggling. And in many ways, faith is kind of pushing into difficult areas for many places. And I suppose that from us, we kind of identified a couple of areas that we were really concerned about within the life of CHBC, weren't they? So you share one, I'll share one.
Sure.
I want to get you talking rather than just me talking.
Yeah, sure. I think one of the things was definitely a sense of consumerism that's in our society. That more and more, you know, we don't grow vegetables anymore. You go and you buy it pre-packaged. Now you buy it pre-packaged and cut, so you just put it out of the bag. There's a sense that as the consumer, you just take what you want and leave the rest. And certainly felt like there was a sense of that coming in the church. I've been a part of youth ministry for a long time in my life, and I felt like there was an increasing sense that, yes, we were providing childcare in one sense, but even that growing faith had become something that, well, I want a bit of this and I'll have a bit of that, but that's a bit too hard, that's not ready for me. And it was very much around sort of a, we might say seeker sensitive, but it was a consumer-based model that people would tap into faith when they needed it and walk away from it when they didn't.
And I suppose COVID only really accentuated. I mean, consumerism is a part of the gods in our society, in our Western society, and COVID only really magnified it, didn't it? It's a strange sort of experience of church life when we think about even when we would gather that it was pixels and not flesh and blood. It was kind of like, for months at a time, it was only a few people who were even allowed to participate. And so it was kind of like even more a sense of, like, I don't know about you guys, but when I watch a screen, I don't feel as connected as what I do when I'm in the auditorium and stuff like that. So I would sit sometimes down in my lounge room with my wife, and I would critique almost like what someone was wearing. And frankly, I really don't care what people are wearing, but like just because I was on a screen, it was this distance and things like that. And it made me more of almost like an outsider rather than an insider, so to speak, and more of a spectator than a participant. And I think that's probably one of the key things that we've felt for a while, is that we were concerned that it would become more of a spectator. And Christianity is anything but a spectator type life. So that was one. The second one I think that we saw, and we've mentioned this a little bit to you before, was that at Croydon Hills, our assessment was that we do some things all right and some things quite well with a bunch of different areas. But one of the areas that as a church community that we've always struggled with is seeing people who have never had any experience of church life come to know Jesus. I remember 2 years ago sitting down with Jerry Revere and Neville Taylor, who were the two previous senior pastors here. So this church is 37 years old, but we've actually only had 3 permanent senior pastors in that 37 years, which is pretty amazing anyway, just in terms of that sort of longevity. But like all 3 of us, and the other 2 guys were sharing with me about the history, it's never been a place where there's been huge numbers of people who have come from completely unchurched environments come to know Jesus. And if we believe that you find hope, meaning and love in Jesus, and if we look around Maroondah, and you know this, you know that when the world that you live in, the people that you sit beside at work, or the people that you rub shoulders when you play sport, or the people that you socialise, that more and more people are not interested in a sense at all in the church institution, that this is even more of an issue as we kind of look forward into the next 5, 10, 20, 50 years. It's even more of an issue. And so I suppose that those were 2 of the kind of the key issues. And so when we went to the United States for a couple of weeks, that was what we did, but the why is really the things that we've been kind of talking about. They were the kind of the key things that actually drove that. And there's even a bit of a story. So we'll get to the United States soon. And can I just say there's some funny stories about things that happen in the United States. If you would like to hear them, we'd love to share with you some of them. I'm not sure that we're allowed to talk about some of them here from public consumption. My kids advised me, said, "No, don't do that, Dad. Don't do that." And it wasn't even embarrassing for them. So we've decided not to do that. But we'd love to talk to you about some of the different things that were kind of part of that experience. But there were other things that led up to it, because this concern about the whole sense of being able to connect to people who are outside the church has been there for a while. And so a couple of years ago, we went and spoke to the church leadership. And what happened out of that, Matt?
I resigned.
Yeah.
Well, I tried to. And it wasn't because I didn't love Croydon Hills, or I didn't love the role, or I didn't love the church. But I really felt like within me is a heart for those people that don't know Jesus. And, it kind of occurred to me that I could stand at the front of the church and throw a tennis ball to houses that people had never heard the gospel. They see the cars come in and they see the cars go out, and yet they don't know the truth. They don't know the power of God, of when you live your life in submission and surrender to Jesus, and what that does. And I really have felt for a long time a burden in my heart for that space. Often I'll go down to the train station, you might see me there, and I'll just linger with intent, I think is Barney's word out the back, where you just hang around and just wait for the opportunity, and it always comes, because God has a heart for those people. And, there's 116,000 people in Maroondah. There's probably another 20 or 30,000 that are within Yarra Valley that are right at our doorstep, that are hungry for the gospel. They just don't know it yet. Yeah. And so I talked to Andrew and talked to the leadership team and shared that heart with them. I also felt like it was a good time for the next generation of leadership to come into the next gen space, and Megan's doing a fantastic job there. And I wasn't sure how they took that.
It wasn't even simple. Like, so this conversation went on for probably 4 or 5 months. I remember one of the members of the leadership asking me this question. I'm not even sure it was a question. Why would we move Matt out of an area where he's doing such a good job into something else? Why? And it's a good question. But really the heart of it was what we've just shared about, was the 120,000 plus and beyond who are in need. And for us as a church, to see us, in a sense, push into those type of areas. So when you kind of took on that role, there was a few different areas where it was kind of parts of focus. What specific things were kind of part of that?
Yeah, so I had three main kind of roles inside that space. One was to identify people and identify opportunities for us to share our faith. And so we generated some of those. We had the movement box. I know some of the small groups did those. It was that idea of sort of just putting share on the radar, that we are a church that is sharing our faith. We talked about exploring opportunities, so things like Alpha and Bible discovery. And then we thought about the culture. And for me, that's the big piece, is how do you shift a culture to be one that rediscovers its call, its sense of being missionaries to our local area.
Yeah, and that was a really significant part, wasn't it? The kind of the cultural change. And particularly as we thought about, like, I'm not sure about you guys, if you've ever invited someone to come to a church service. A number of people have said to me this. I remember having this conversation with the principal at Warrenwood Primary School, and he said to me, Andrew, if I entered the building, the roof would drop on my head. And, you know, the truth is that he'd never been to a church building in his life. Never. Not for a funeral, not for a wedding, not for a service. He has a perception of a church thing that is very, very, limited in what it might be. It would be very surprising for him to experience something like that. And so that was part of, I suppose, the exploring and trying to understand what the future might entail. And can I just say that we're actually about to kick off our first Alpha thing here in August, is that right?
Yeah, term 3, yep.
In term 3, so if you want to be a part of that, that's a fantastic opportunity for people to do. But like in terms of the Explorer, it was also a matter of trying to say, well, how do we help to bring good news to people who are afraid of the culture of the Christian church institution? That was one of the kind of things. So there was some stuff that was some groundwork that happened even in your own life and work, wasn't there?
Yeah, so some of you know that a couple of days a week I have a printing business in Bayswater. And it really occurred to me at the time, I felt like God was saying, not just what program will we create, what consumer sort of on-the-shelf thing can we invent that you push a button and fixes all the problem. I really felt like God was saying, what can you do? What can be your heart, and how can you express your faith? And so I asked God the question, well, who is in my world? Who can I take the gospel to? And we have a business in Bayswater. Our factory is one of a little group of 7 or 8. And there's a guy there who lives in his factory who was completely isolated, and COVID just really pushed his depression to be way on the charts, and he was at risk, to be honest. And so I asked God the question, what can I do? And he said, be family. Be your presence. And so we began meeting intentionally on a Thursday at lunchtime. We opened up our factory, and I realized that it wasn't just that one guy in that factory that needed community and needed a church, to use that word very loosely. But they all needed this welcome that we can provide, salt and light. And so we opened up our factory and we invited guys from other factories, and we gather for about an hour and a half on a Thursday. There's always a barbecue. Sometimes there's KFC. But generally it's just a time to gather. It's a time to talk. And we simply present the gospel in relationship. And so to articulate the gospel, I had to learn to speak Rod's language. And he's a nominal Buddhist, I would imagine. He's quite, like there's something out there. I don't really have anything about it. And so to have the opportunity of sharing our faith, we've invested a lot of time, particularly with him, but with the other guys that are in the area. And so now something like Alpha, for example, makes perfect sense, because I invite him to come along, and he knows me, he trusts me, because we've invested all that time.
And so I suppose that, like, some of the learnings that we've had over the last couple of years was about, okay, there's a real antagonism towards the institution, but there's a couple of things which are really positive, aren't they, about what really the ache is within people.
Yeah, look, there's research out there that says, people ask, what's your opinion of the church? That's very low numbers that think the church is a good institution. And what do you think about Christians? Well, that's very low too. But what do you think about the Christians you know? Oh, well, he's all right. That's a good guy. That's a good Christian. Because in the context of relationship, a relationship with Jesus makes sense, where you're able to not just pass it on as a packet of information, but it's embedded in life. And so with that particular the story, we've had such incredible conversations that we would never have had before because we took the opportunity of relationship and that context. And so thinking about how we operate as an organisation here, how we operate as light and salt for our area, really there are some huge barriers. And for me, the carols, not this carols, but the one before, was a really big watershed moment. I knocked on all of the doors of the houses around the church just to say, hey, we'd love for you to come to the church, come for the carols. And I was expecting, partly I was expecting get away, don't want to talk to you. But the actual response was, we love living near a church, but we don't want to have anything to do with it. And I was like, there's a gap there between that perception and then the reality, and that gap is relationship.
It's interesting when you talk about that. I was reminded, I was talking to Gitta the other day about some of the stuff started already this year with Winter Shelter, and she was sharing with me about, and we know that there's in the hearts and minds of the first timers, there's a fear, or what's going to happen if I go to a church? But then actually when they participate, and Gitta was, she put a blurb up on social media the other day about how one of them said that this was one of the best things they'd ever done, in the sense that how they were welcomed and they experienced love rather than what they feared and stuff like that. And so I suppose that there's this thing of institution versus relationship, isn't there? And what that might look like. And so as part of that, we started to explore what different expressions of church might look like. And so sometimes you might hear us using this phrase around micro-church, micro meaning kind of small versions of church. So this would be considered kind of like a larger church. When this entire church community gets together, there's something like 800 to 1,000 people who are part of this. This is largish. It has like things which look like institution, as distinct from micro things. But micro church stuff and things like that, I had a million questions, and I had like a million questions. And I probably still only have like 1,000 questions. But that was actually part of the reason why we went to the US. It only took us 15 minutes to get to the conversation piece about what we were going to share with you, okay? But we really felt it was important to lay some groundwork for you. Don't worry, we're pastors. We can speak for an hour and a half. It's a long weekend. What would you rather do? So what did we do, Matt? Tell us.
Well, apart from a few excursions in LA, which you can talk to us about later, that was fantastic. I talked to lots and lots of people, lots of conversations in airports, but the main reason that we went to the US was for three particular groups. There was one called the Tampa Bay Underground, which is in Tampa Bay. The next group that we went to was in Orlando, but they are from Kansas City, and they have been running church networks as well in Kansas City. I think some of the photos will come up on the screen. And then there was a conference called the Exponential Conference. It had nothing to do with mathematics. It's a joke. Okay. So actually it does have to do with mathematics, but souls. And it was a church multiplication conference that we went to with ridiculous numbers of people. It was amazing.
Yeah. So the two underground movements are movements of micro-churches, aren't they? Right? So help people to understand what that looks like.
Right. Well, the first thing is a micro-church is contextual. So for me to say, and this is part of the issue of trying to communicate something like this, is a microchurch can look a million different ways. It's a group of people that gather together around Jesus. Discipleship is the priority. So the priority is growing closer to Jesus and allowing your faith to be seen and impact the people that are already connected to you in relationship. And so for us down at the factory in Bayswater, a microchurch literally was lunchtime on a Thursday. There's a few Christian guys already there with a heart for those men that are in that area. And so it looks like a barbecue. Of course it does. It looks like a Bunnings barbecue. But it's a space where we love and we care for people, and that provided the environment where discipleship can happen. I know there's a group in, I think they're in Florida as well, and they have a hula hoop microchurch. I kid you not. It is a hula hoop. There's a group of girls. They came out of Bible college and they were passionate to reach young women that are disconnected from society for lots of different reasons. And so they started a hula hoop club. And I think from memory now, there's about 15 or 16 little groups of hula hooping Jesus people where they use the techniques it takes to run a hula hoop to teach people about what it means to walk in connection with the Holy Spirit. It's amazing.
There are many other ones. There are numbers that run in Australia that are often built with some sort of sense of commonality of life. I know that one person I deal with said that they have one of their leaders is a lady who works during the week, and on Friday night she just wanted to do some craft and relaxing and invited like a bunch of other people, and it actually became kind of the seeds of a micro church where the relationship, the community, what led into in a sense of discipleship was a part of their experience. So they have many different experiences. And so like Tampa Bay and Kansas City have both been running for 5 to 10 years with different networks. They both have somewhere between 100 and 200 micro churches with probably 10 to 20 people in each, supported with hubs and different things. But importantly for us, they're actually really connecting with and reaching people who the institutional church is unable, it seems, to reach.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, the group that's in Kansas City, I've done a couple of learning cohorts with them. They have a group called Share the Hope, which is a micro church that's planting micro churches of ex-offenders that have come out of prison. And these guys, lots of them found faith in prison. It's very, very simple. They open the Bible and they say, God, what are you teaching me out of the Bible? And there's a story that during COVID, the pastors couldn't go into the prisons anymore. And so they kept ringing. And the guys, the prisoners, would be like, stop calling us. Every time you call, I'm about to lead someone to Jesus and you interrupt me. Because it's the idea that the gospel has incredible power when it's embedded in the lives of people who are surrendered to Jesus. Not just to a pastoral team, not just to a paid professional, but to people as they follow Jesus. That power of the gospel in their life is the greatest tool that they can use. And so these churches, both Kansas City and Tampa Bay, have seen incredible amounts of growth in spaces where you wouldn't expect Jesus to be honoured and for discipleship to happen. It's been amazing.
And so for us, that's really part of, I suppose, what our heart was when we started, when we asked the question why, which we asked before we said, in a sense, what. It was all about the why was kind of the driving factor. So both of us essentially went to kind of like 2.5 conferences over the space of a couple of weeks with all sorts of different training kind of things. We both had different things that we kind of learnt and experienced out of them. What would you say were some of the keys for you, Matt?
I wrote some things down because I do get caught on tangents. But I'm particularly passionate, I think. And there's some things that really stood out to me, that commonality in discipleship around the world and over time, where I think some of those things were brought to the surface. So extraordinary prayer. We've just done a season on prayer. And I think that was important from a few perspectives because it talks about intimacy with the Holy Spirit. It talks about, Lord, what do you have for me today? And so rather than living the Christian life that becomes, this is my ritual, this is my rhythm, and this is what I do, it becomes more, it shifts the posture to say, God, what are you doing? Where are you working? And how can I be involved? And I think that was a common thing. So there's a group of churches in India, and this church has been going for 20 years. They started with 5 people. They now have 70,000 churches. They don't have an email address. They don't have a website. They don't have a way of communicating other than person to person to person. And it's all based around that idea of obedience to Jesus. So that was definitely a big one. Life-on-life discipleship. So discipleship is a term that maybe we've used sparingly in the past. Maybe we've been careful how we use it. But discipleship is life on life. You know, Paul says, follow me as I follow Christ. It's that idea that as you experience Jesus in your life, you allow people to see that, to see the wins, to see the failure, to see the recovery, just to see you work out your life with Jesus. So that's definitely a big learning. This one's a bit nerdy, but I'm going to say it anyway. Agile structure. So building systems and structures that can be flexible enough to reach every person. The gospel has to work everywhere. It has to work on the slums in the Philippines. It has to work in, communist Russia, which is not communist anymore. It has to work in Maroondah. It has to work everywhere because it is the gospel. And it's God's gospel is for the whole world. So building structures that are nimble enough to be supportive and not just to leave people, but at the same time not to take over their particular contextualized message. I got one more, is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. And this last one was kind of a statement that just came to me, but kind of brought a few things together, and that is a bigger vision, smaller steps. And the idea is that if we think about reaching, 150,000 people, that's insurmountable, that's impossible. but we can all take steps and take those steps together. Yeah. So working out what those steps are has been a really big learning. What about you?
Well, I think this is really important. So Matt and I, we've got different gifts and different roles and things like that. And originally part of the reason I went was to get answers, to ask questions, and to support Matt in his role as well. It was kind of like this dual purpose. I was reminded, I think, of two critical things. So the first one is this, is that it's important that we marry the mission, not the model. Okay, so the mission that we have is to make followers of Jesus. And if you're a follower of Jesus, that's central. And I don't care what country, what time, generation, whatever, that's central to what we're called to do. That's the mission of Jesus' people, right? Is to partner with God and to making followers of Jesus. So that's the core thing. The model that we use at the moment, in a sense, is, here we gather at different times, we have different ministries that run, and they all have a time and a place. And the truth is that throughout history, they've all changed. So for the early church met in houses because that's all the buildings that were available. They were limited by size because, a house was a certain size, right? They didn't have access, in a sense, to any other technology. As you journey through history, you see that once we get the coming, in a sense, of Constantine in the 4th century and the start of what becomes kind of like Christendom, you see cathedrals and things like that in large places. Post the Reformation in the 1500s, we start to see the rise of the village church, and part of the catchphrase around the village church was that there should be a church within walking distance for everybody. And you know what? People lived in villages. So there would be a village church because, that's how far you could walk. There wasn't a car. There wasn't a phone. The printing press changed how they did things, but that was at that stage. Come the more modern era, people have cars, they meet in houses, we have different sorts of buildings. So the model kind of keeps changing because the model is actually not what is critical. What is critical is the mission. And so for us, as we think about, if our mission is to see people become followers of Jesus, if we see that people want to experience hope and love and meaning in Jesus, right, that's what is important. The model's not the most important thing. Models come and go. They are born, they thrive and grow, and then they die. And so I don't want to be attached to a model. I want to see us be able to fulfill our mission. So that for me is one thing. And I think the second thing that is, I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier on, but I have been reminded again and again, this is something that we all need to be in. There's a friend of mine who uses a phrase, the mission of God in the hand of every follower of Jesus. And sometimes we have people up on a stage, ironically, people who are professionals, people who have gone through all sorts of training and education and stuff like that, educated beyond our intelligence sometimes, and we think, let's pay them and they can do it. And you know what? We can do some things, we can reach some people, but we can't reach a fraction of the people that us as a community can reach. And so the bottom line ultimately has to be that all of us need to participate. Now, this is a thing for every single person in the church community for us to be engaged in. If we, in fact, I'm going to talk about this next week in our anniversary, but if we think of our faith as something that we watch, right, it will soon die. It will soon atrophy. Faith is like a muscle. It needs to be exercised. It needs to be invested and built up in. If you just watch, it just shrivels up. And they're the two things, I suppose, that I've been centrally reminded about. I suppose for each of us, and for Matt and myself and for the leadership, but also for us as a church community, the question that we'll ask ourselves is, where are we going to from here? And I think that this is something that we want to invite you to participate in as well. One of the reasons that we've tried to engage people in these conversations and with the leadership and things like that is, if it just depends on a couple of people, it's doomed. And so we really want you to participate in that. So some of the things we want to encourage you to do is things like this. Continue to pray. All right? Matt said before when he talked about what the whole thing of extraordinary prayer is really a matter of listening to God and asking, God, where are you calling me to be involved in my own journey? And that really helps to change our own personal faith once we start to get a sense of that. Once we start to get a sense that I'm actually involved in this, I'm not just a spectator, it changes the dynamic of your faith. And I think that's a thing. I think that, can I say to you that you need to be praying for the leadership as we kind of discern our way through this. And above all, I think continue to participate. And we're going to make some more steps. There'll be a number of communication around this. You can expect to see some stuff more in term 3. We're going to share for probably about 5 weeks on this kind of theme together. But also, you might even want to start thinking about, where's my starting point? Okay, here's an alpha course. It's a nice starting point to do. So it might be something like that for wherever you're at. But there's a whole bunch of things that I think, and you know what? The answer, I think, for some of it is I actually don't know where it ends up, which kind of freaks me out a little bit. My leadership style is more like I'm a relatively big picture thinker, but I'm not a micromanager. I don't like to tell people. I want to say, this is what we need to get done. How do you think we can, and then kind of free and get you to do it and stuff like that. But as Matt likes to say, he says, Harris, he says, you're a bit like an architect. You like to build the structure and know what it's kind of looking like as you plan it. But some of this I actually don't know. And it excites you. I'm not sure it excites me quite to the same degree. And I suspect that there's people here who it excites even less. But like if we answer that question...
There are some whose hearts are leaping right now. They're my people.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
The unknown.
Look, you know what a bell curve is? A bell curve, right? So on a bell curve, there's, like the median, right? The right in the middle, the mean, the average, right? And on the extremes, 3 standard deviations is the extremes, right? Okay. So there's people who love change, and then there's people who hate change. Okay. So you might be able to imagine where you belong on that. Okay. So I'm about over here on the I love change, but I'm about 2 standard deviations. Matt's about 5 standard deviations. All right? And most people are here right in the middle, and they're kind of like, yeah, I know sometimes we need change. I'll do it reluctantly. All right? But we actually don't really know what it looks like. I think that God does, but I think that the thing that is going to drive us is we've got to be driven by what the mission is, not what our model is. We've got to be driven by that. And we asked ourselves at the start this question: what does this church look like in 10 years' time? Okay? And if I asked you that, can you imagine what it would look like? Because you know what? Our society is increasingly secular. Institutional churches are dying everywhere. But the message and hope of Jesus isn't. So what does it look like? I don't know. I've got some thoughts, but I suspect they're partly right and partly wrong. Okay, and we'll see. But we want to invite you to partner with us on this journey together. That's kind of our time tonight, this morning. It's been a not normal sermon, all right, but we wanted to share with you, and hopefully it's been helpful about some of the journey and stuff. Can I say that the invitation is there for more conversations, all right? If you are sick of your faith being passive, all right, this is the time for you. That's what I would say. This is the time for you. For some people here, I know you love coming to like a gathering like this, and we're going to continue to do this. We want to celebrate. I enjoy it. Matt enjoys it. But for some of you, you don't probably even enjoy coming together a thing like this. You know what? The things that excite you is you hear Rob get up and talk about sitting down with people at a meal or caring for those who are on the margin. That is a wonderful expression of my faith. You know what? There's room in this family of God for all of us in this space. So we're really excited about that together, okay? So thanks very much, my work partner. 9 years, and we don't look any different than when we started.
That's not true.
It's hard to believe, isn't it, mate? Yeah. Okay, so, I'm gonna kick you out. Matt told me, I think Matt told me, and then my youngest daughter told me, Andrew, at this point in time, you've got to pray for a really long prayer because it's a long weekend and some of the online digital team is away. And so he's going upstairs to make sure the mix is right for the sound for those who are joining us online. My daughter reminded me of one occasion when we had a Karen anniversary. I think it was the very first Karen anniversary we had when we came down here. And so my oldest daughter at the time was 9 years of age, and we were sitting in this auditorium, and one of the Karen community, this lady from Sydney, she prayed for 25 minutes in Karen. And my 9-year-old sat beside me, nudging me, saying, "Dad, how long is this going to go for?" And I'm like, "I have no idea, honey. I'm not going to pray for 25 minutes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to invite you to stand with me, okay? And I'm going to, like Rob did, invite you to pray, okay? And in that, you might want to pray 2 lines like this. God, what are you calling me to do? Okay? It's a listening prayer, isn't it? You might want to pray something like this. God, who are you calling me to? Now, God, we have sung about your greatness. We reminded ourselves that we can't be separated from your love. And now, God, our prayer is that those in our community, our brothers, sisters, family, our work colleagues, our social friends, our neighbours, would understand some of your greatness, experience some of your love. And so, our God, we would pray that you would speak now to our hearts, to our minds. Father, help us with our fears. We lay our fears down before you. For our God, we long to see people know you. See the people around us who are struggling, who are lost, who need to experience hope, meaning and love. So, our God, we ask you to work. We ask that your Spirit would change lives, change us as well. Amen. I think we're going to sing together now. I invite you to stay standing with us.